right, why don't we get started here? He's already in the fifth lecture in this winter quarter, searching for community. And looking all along at the spiritual life, I've been trying to zero in on the kinds of searches that we know in our lives, the questing that goes on. Part of the premise of that is that we human beings are just precisely that kind of person, the ones who are not really ever satisfied with where we are at any given point, always looking for more knowledge, for more experience, for more love in our lives. So we are the questing beings and searchers. As Ronner likes to say, we are the question for whom there is no answer. We are the question. We have that question written in the center of our being, and as we walk this earth, we are never totally satisfied with the kinds of responses we get. We get partial answers and we feel good, get certain things in order, and we're pleased and maybe on top of the world for a while, and then certain other things happen, new experiences come, and it breaks up, and we begin to quest again. So we are climbing that mountain in life, and at times we stop and rest, and it's peaceful, and we like it, and everything's in order, and our world is rather neat and programmed, and we are comfortable, and then something happens, either an impulse from within, or an allurement from without, or some breakup of our lives in some way, and then it seems as though we're forced to begin to climb that mountain again to find a new standpoint from which we can see clearly again and begin to rest our bones a bit and gather our forces and focus our attention and get comfortable again. At least I think that a lot of people experience their lives that way. Sometimes they have the image that we go along and we pull it together, rather we feel somewhat integrated, and those are probably some of the best moments we ever know in our lives, when we're flowing, able to go with the flow, we feel together, working out of a strong center inside of us, and then something breaks that up, and we're in the process then of gathering ourselves again, trying to get it back together, trying to pull the loose ends into some sort of focus once more. So the premise of this whole 18-part series is that we are questing beings, searching individuals. And what I've tried to do is to examine that search from a lot of different angles. Try to say more clearly how we search and what the quest is all about. So tonight we are talking about that search in terms of the quest for community and trying to see the church as a response to that. You notice in the notes I always list the page readings from the Foundations of Christian Faith. The Foundations is the summary work of Ronner, sort of pulling together his ideas. Did that late in his life. I remember one time I was in Ronner's room, and he had this big pile of notes like this. And he was telling me a few things, and he said, "Here, I want to show you something." And he took me over and he showed me these notes. And I said, "That's impressive." And I had heard that very often his students listened to his lectures and then typed out the notes and circulated them. And I said to him, "Oh, did your students do those?" And he said, "No, my students, no, those are mine here." And that was the makings of this book that we know as the Foundations of Christian Faith. He saw it in a sense as pulling together much of the threads of his theological work. Foundations of Christian Faith is the single best summary of Ronner's thought. Well, and in that book you find some parts that are better than others. This section that I'm dealing with now I think is one of the weaker parts of that book, Foundations of Christian Faith. And it's weaker because I think Ronner did not follow one of his own major insights in that section. That is, that whenever we talk about the Christian doctrines, look at particular aspects of the church, examine our relationship with God, it has to be in terms of our own experience. It has to be in terms of what we're seeking In other words, one of the mistakes we always say of the past is that theology or catechisms, religious instruction, gave answers to questions that nobody had. They were neat answers, terrific. They made a lot of sense and so on. They were nicely formulated and you could memorize them. The problem was, what did they have to say about getting up on Monday morning? Or what did they have to say about living our lives? So the problem has always been giving neat, nice, pat answers, but neglecting the questions. And I'm afraid in this section of the Foundations that Rahner has been guilty of that in a way. He has not clearly enough linked what he has to say about the church with the questing, the searching spirit that we all have. So in doing these lectures, I'm trying to supply for that, trying to make sure that we understand the common quest that we are in. Now, tonight I want to talk, therefore, about the hunger for community, search for community. And I think that is particularly poignant in our own time. There's a lot of ways in which this is really a serious, deep search for people because they feel a general lack of it. A lot of times it has to do probably with the breakdown of neighborhoods. In the old days, there were particular neighborhoods. You lived there for a long period of time. You knew your neighbors and so on. You could send your kids over next door if you were going off to the store. There would be people around that you could trust and felt at home with. Now, some people still enjoy the luxury of that. For many people, it's different. I think of when my sister moved to New York out in Long Island, sort of uprooted from Ohio and goes off there and trying to raise these children without that kind of support system, without a community around her, without a grandmother nearby she could give the kids to, or without neighbors that she really was close enough to say, we need help here, or let's drive to church together, or whatever. So that part of this hunger for community comes from the very breakdowns in the culture in which we live. The average person moves something like 5 times in their adult life. Well, when you keep moving around, it's hard to establish those kinds of connections. I think we could do that analysis, too, from a very personal kind of level. I suppose one of the sad things to hear is for someone to say, I really don't have a friend that I could confide in. No, I really, I look around, there's nobody. If I really had to pour my guts out or I just really needed somebody now, there's no friend that I have that I could reach out to that way. I suppose I hear that statement made more often from males in our culture than from females, but it certainly is a sad thing when one hears it. There's no friend, nobody that one can share with. Now, you would expect that need, that hunger, to be taken care of within the family community. That's where we would at least like to see those hungers satisfied, where this close relationship, this ability to share, and so on would go on. And yet, the truth of the matter is that very often in family life as well, because of the busyness, because people are moving in different directions, because people are seldom alone, because meals now are scattered, because the family isn't all together around the table, because people find it difficult to talk about important things in life. For all of those kinds of reasons, even the family very often does not supply for this hunger for community. And that, of course, is a very sad thing. Instead, we often find that one of my great remembrances as a youngster was be sitting around listening to the adults talk. It was a way in which one was gradually sort of initiated into that world. I used to love to listen to that. Well, I don't meet many young people anymore who would ever say that they love to just sit around and be quiet and listen to the adults talk. Somehow the world is different now. The kids dominate the conversation if they are there, or they want to get up from the table and leave quickly, or they don't want to be in the room, the adults. There's something different about that. I don't know exactly what to make of all of it, but I sense that the experience is different. inability, I suppose, in a way to drink in that larger world or to appreciate the world of the adult. And therefore, we have a breakdown, therefore, in the kind of communication that's necessary for a sense of community. Again, sad when people say right within the family that it's more a sense of discord than of actual belonging and closeness. And I suppose, finally, that one would expect this sense of intimacy to be most closely developed between spouses. No, that's where one would expect the desire for intimacy to be satisfied. And yet again, as we know clearly from the great breakdown of communications in family life, problems that one sees as a counselor, as a marriage counselor and so on, so often that doesn't happen. Almost, I suppose, to a surprising degree, where a spouse would say, well, geez, I could never talk to him about that, or I wouldn't think of sharing that with my wife. You know, it's almost surprising in a way, the way that bonding does not seem to free up, liberate, allow for real intimacy and sharing, the kind of thing we would associate with this notion of community that we are talking about. So, in many ways, even though people living in all these communities, there is this hunger that is not satisfied. You find people, therefore, searching for it all over the place. How can we get involved in this situation where we can be talking about deep feelings, where we can be searching together out the great questions, when we can feel comfortable and at home, where we could reveal our problems or our weaknesses and expect to hear a healing, understanding word back. That's what the hunger for community, it seems to me, is all about. Now, there is another side to this thing that has to be explored. Because there are some people who would say, all that you just described is not me. It's just not me. It's not the way it is with me. I got too much community. I'm satiated with it. I got too many people around me all the time. I got too many, I'm trying to juggle too many friendships. No, I'm trying to keep too many people happy here. No, I feel as though I'm drained with all this effort to continue to share at this deep level. What I need is some superficiality in my life. No, I need some just frivolous kind of activity. I got too much involvement in community. Our friend Michael Novak, who is here, loves to quote de Tocqueville, the French visitor to the United States back in the 1830s, as you remember. He wrote the great book, Democracy in America, which is still thought of by many people as being the most incisive analysis of the American culture that's ever been made, even up to our own time. What was it? Richard Reeves recently, the columnist, redid de Tocqueville's route, going through the United States and stopping at the same places he did and so on. Well, de Tocqueville told us many things about ourselves, and one of the things that struck him that was so different about Americans from other people that he knew, the French and the people on the continent, distinctive characteristic was the American desire and actually carrying out of forming voluntary associations. He said, geez, whenever Americans want to get something done, they form a group to do it. They get a committee together to try to handle the problem, whatever it is, from building schools or starting a film festival or building hospitals or trying to get the garbage picked up better or whatever it is. That the distinctive thing about Americans is they're not just going to do it themselves, and they're not really going to expect the government to do it, but they end up forming all of these smaller groupings. So that's interesting to think of, you know. I mean, you start thinking of Elks and Kiwanis and library clubs and study groups and Bible studies and I mean, how many different voluntary kinds of associations are there in the United States? And how many people are there? You've got the bridge club, and you've got the bowling team here. You've got the group you play golf with once a week over here. You have this group that you always go up to Stratford to the Shakespeare Festival with, or whatever it is, these voluntary associations. Now, that is, in a sense, the other side of this coin. It's a different kind of outlook. It's saying that the problem isn't so much isolation from that viewpoint. It's like I got too much of it. I got too many people around me. That what I really want is some solitude. What I really like is a few hours by myself, where I could think and get my head together and meditate and not have responsibilities to people, not have drains on my time and so on. I just want to be quiet for a while. Give me that peaceful island. So that becomes the other side of it. Some people just got too much community, it appears. Now, I want to go a step forward with that kind of analysis, because I think that many people would say that's true, especially in terms, where do we get that in terms of the church? I wrote an article one time talking about the woman who came into church, and this woman is involved in the Red Cross. She's raising a family of 4 kids. She's in a bridge club and so on. She's got barely enough time to keep her head above water with her taxi service for her kids and so on. And she gets into church, and the pastor says, everybody here has got to belong to one of the committees in the church. And if you don't belong to a committee in this church, that there's something wrong with you and you're not really a good member of this parish. The woman walks out of church, as she said, dripping in guilt. She doesn't have one more minute of time, and the pastor is just berating her for not belonging to the liturgy committee. Well, I wrote that up, and I got a lot of response to that article. A whole lot of people said, yeah, that's me. You know, I don't want to go to church and feel guilty. I don't need any more involvement. I don't have time for more involvement. And yet they're always calling for that. That's a place in which the whole place we're talking about to now, the search for community and the church, begins to intersect, and where you begin to see a problem area. So I know from my mail and from responses that many people feel exactly that way. But I said that I wanted to go further with that analysis, and that would be in the sense that while one has all of those involvements, say the woman is in the bridge club, and she's at the Red Cross, and she's raising those 4 kids, there still may be a way in which the hunger for intimacy and for community in the full sense of face-to-face relationships, of struggle with life, of being able to be oneself, where all of that is not satisfied. Where one could be busy all the time, doing a whole lot of things, but feel that it is superficial, that it really doesn't satisfy the deeper longings for togetherness, fellowship, brotherhood, sisterhood, and so on. Okay, I think I'm going to stop my analysis there of the hunger for community, and why don't we do as we often do, we'll take a stop here, and what I'd like you to do is react to what I said. See if you can identify yourself in terms of either the hunger for community or the being satiated with it. Where do you stand in all of that? What are your own longings in relationship to community? Why don't we take a couple minutes to do this now? There are some people had asked me for notes from the first lectures. I don't have any from the first one, but the notes from the other lectures are down here on that little table there. People can pick up if they want. Also, the religious ed forms in the back for people who are taking it for credit. Okay, I want to respond now to some of this out of a Rahnerian framework. And I want to start with saying a few things about Uncle Carl along this line, because he himself really struggled with this problem of community and individualism. Example, I used to, for a couple months, used to be at his house for liturgy each day at noon, and the whole community would gather for the Mass at noontime and then eat afterwards. And the odd thing was that Ronner himself was never there. He used to, this is, I almost hate to say this, destroy his image in some people's eyes, I suppose, but he used to celebrate Mass himself, by himself, in the morning, early, very early, probably before most of the people were up. Now that is the actual practice of the man, and his words were often that he always felt that the younger generation had a different sense of community than he did himself. He called himself a 19th century individualist in this way. Now this is, a little bit hard to put together. I once did an analysis of this, of Ronner, trying to explain his psychology on this and explain how he functioned this way. And I sat him down one time and wanted him to read what I had written about it. And I was hoping at the end he was going to say something like, "Geez, I think you have understood me better than I understand myself." So I sat him down, he started reading, and as he was reading, he got madder and madder. And finally, at one point, I said, "I think that's about enough. I don't think there's any need to read any more of this." Thus, for my incisive analysis of Ronner. But it's interesting, this man, I think, who wrestled with this kind of question himself, had so many tremendous things to say about it that I think grew out of his own struggle. I don't think of them being in any way hypocritical. I don't think of them as being inauthentic. I think it out of his own struggle to come to terms with community, he learned many important things and was able to write about them very incisively. So, himself, sense of community. I'm just thinking, one of his articles that he wrote changed the practice of Catholic clergy on this very point. And that was that when Catholic clergy used to be together, like on a vacation, people would say private masses. Priests would say private masses if they were in a large grouping. And Ronner wrote an article saying that this didn't really make a whole lot of sense. And that just the multiplication of masses didn't mean you got more grace or anything. And so it made more sense to maybe have one good mass instead of a whole bunch of these private ones going on. So single-handedly, I'd say, through that article, he changed the practice of most of the clergy in the Catholic Church over that. And yet he himself maybe never fully came to terms with that. Very interesting. Well, let's turn now to some of the things that Ronner would say about community and so on. One of the important things he would do in responding to this is lead us to talking about the church in terms of the local church and the parish. One of Ronner's great thrust was that when you talk about the church, you don't want to just talk about that big universal church that's centered in Rome and so on, and the hierarchy and all the doctrines and everything, this great, vast reality that no one could ever get a hold of anyway. Ronner said where the church is real for us is in that local parish. The place where you have your kids baptized and take your loved ones to bury them, the place where you get married, the place where you go on Sunday to hear the Word and be nourished at the Eucharistic banquet. That's where the church is real. That's what shapes people's perceptions. That's where you get your gutsy feelings about what the church is all about. You can theorize all day about this big, vast church, but it's real to us in terms of where we grew up, what the masses were like there, what the clergy were like, what sort of opportunities to socialize were there, and so on. And that's where people really become rooted, is in that parish. I was talking about my sister. I think that going to New York and being in this vast place and so on. I had my sense that part of the way she handled that was through her local parish, where kids went to school and where she got involved and where she helped out with a marriage course and so on. That became her way of rooting herself in a new place. If it wasn't for that parish, she probably would have felt even more lost. But that became home in a way, got to know the priests and so on. It was just very natural. Go there, settle down, and so on. So it is, in terms of the local parish, that we get our real feel for what the church is all about. So we want to do an analysis of parish as the response to the hunger for community. It's going to be satisfied. It's not by something that's going on in Rome. It's because when you walk into church, you see people you know, and afterwards there are people there when they got a hard time that they gather around you. I just went through this with the gentleman in Bowling Green. His wife died of cancer recently. I preached the funeral back a week or more ago now, and the thrust of what I had to say was a celebration of community. The people in that parish were marvelous. They came forward. They took turns driving her here to Toledo for her treatments. They organized a whole grouping of people that some would bring in food. Other people would come and take care of her for a while. Other people tried to help out with her husband's teaching assignments and so on. It was just a marvelous display of, in a time of crisis, people coming together and responding to the need. There was what I saw, community in action. I said from a distance, and those were people of the parish I used to minister in, I said, I was so proud of what happened, proud to have been a part of that kind of group that could come forward over quite a period of time to be helpful like that. That is a part of what it means to say a parish is a community kind of response at a local level. A second point that I would make, and that is that Rahner has a tremendous sense of the church as being a sinful church. Were you surprised in the prayer that you read, the way he prayed about the church leaders, for example? I mean, probably a lot of people were. He's in that prayer, I think I left out some of the harsher lines. He says, you don't see much from these people in terms of showing pastoral concern. You don't see much in terms of really admitting mistakes, showing humanity and so on. It's a very harsh prayer. I don't remember how much of the harshness I captured in there. But, he starts out by saying, he says, I don't want to say I'm better than any of those people. Says there's a line in there saying that he says, I don't think I'm a great sign either, a credible sign of what the church ought to be all about. He says, I don't want to claim to be any better. So he says when we're talking sinful church, you're not just talking them. When you're talking sinful church, you're talking us. He's very clear about that. We are distinctively together, collectively, part of the problem as well as the solution. So one of the probably distinctive things about the Catholic community being able to say we are a sinful church. You understand that in much of the Protestant world that would not make sense. Much of the Protestant world, the church is the holy group. They're the saved. They are the covenanted people. You don't really tolerate much sin in that group. If you're in the group, you're expected to be upright and righteous. But the Catholic Church is very different. The Catholic Church is clearly and consciously a sinful church. Probably why we go to confession and so on. There's always been that sense we need to go to confession. All need to go to confession. Pope has to go to confession. Everybody, because we recognize the sinfulness. Probably one of the ways that becomes most concrete and real is the way Catholic people deal with their priests, clergy. The tolerance for the mistakes and failures and sins of the priest is monumental. It is. It's staggering. I mean, I don't know any other parallel to that in any other institution, to tell you the truth. And how many Catholic clergy have covered up, the parishioners have covered up for their alcoholic pastor, for example, or put up with all kinds of authoritarianism, and or tolerated over long periods of time poorly prepared homilies, probably without ever really saying anything about it. That's one way in which you see this clear sense, Catholic sense of the sinfulness of the church, of a sense of inadequacy about it all. Very interesting phenomenon. Just think a little bit about that. Tremendous tolerance for sinfulness and a recognition that we need to ask for forgiveness for this and to try over. One of the weaknesses, of course, of that whole approach is, I'm not putting it forth as just a total virtue, one of the weaknesses is that maybe we don't feel enough the bite of the gospel, the call to holiness. Maybe we don't have enough self-criticism going so that we would improve as much as we ought to, since we seem to be so tolerant of the foibles, the failings, the limitations, and even the sins of all of us in this community. So the church, the parish will be a sinful parish in trying to respond to this hunger for community. Now, one of the ways that I think that is almost helpful is that there is solidarity, therefore, in being a pilgrim. There is togetherness in being a searcher. There's a feeling, therefore, that none of us has to be perfect. We don't have to be. Therefore, we are in solidarity in our sinfulness, in our effort to try to improve. We don't have room for self-righteousness, looking down on some members of the community. There's a good, healthy sense very often that we're in this together. Okay, maybe enough for the question of the sinfulness of the church. I'm inclined to stop there. I've got two ideas. How many ideas I throw out? Ronner's personal reaction, right? And then, what was the other thing I said? The last thing was the sinful church, and then the importance of the local parish, right? So out of those three ideas, which are clear in my own mind, almost, which I've already forgotten, why don't we spend a couple minutes doing our one-on-one? Why don't you pick out of that something that you actually remember? And questions, comments up to now? Yes, Shirley? Well, the question is asked about whether the question of a sense of sinful church is common just to the Catholic Church. I need to distinguish out, Shirley, a couple of things. First of all, the sense of sin, personal sin, is common to all Christians. And in fact, in certain Protestant groupings, there would even be a stronger sense of that personal sin. And that's really not what I'm talking about. It's the way we conceive of the collectivity of the grouping. Oh, now, very often in the Protestant world, it is a covenant kind of grouping. It is a sense of voluntarily joining up with this group on the basis of the fact that we are all committed to living in this way. Part of the movement in Protestantism is called the holiness movement. The holiness churches are based on that the people are holy in there. That's what counts. There's been a lot of disputes within Protestantism about baptism, for example. One of the reasons for delaying baptism would be the idea that you got to have a commitment that you're into this. You're really going to be good. And you intend to live it out. Now you'll get baptized. Now you're in the group. The Catholic community is not so much of that sense of voluntary organization joining up. The Catholic community's got much more of the sense of a church. sociologically. That is, it's an existing group. It's already here. You baptize the kid right away. Kid grows up into it. You know that they'll mess up and not be perfect and all of that. So that the distinctive thing comes, I think, in this sense of how we conceive of the church, not of the personal kind of sinfulness. Once you make that distinction, I think you would probably could latch on to ways in which the Catholic Church does have this kind of notion. I mean, you know, I was thinking of that with the Mennonites. I tell you, I gave a talk there a few months ago, the Mennonite Church, and I mean, they have that sense of the purity of the group. The group really can't get involved in politics or economics or get elected to office and anything. That's a stain, that taints, that sort of takes away from the purity of the group. They need to be more like a sect. They need to stand apart from the rest of the world, hang together in order to remain pure with the gospel. That would be an example of a grouping that would have a much different sense about this sinfulness. Well, it's interesting to think about. I was talking at the break. I mean, you probably find your examples one way or another. Check out and see if whether that proves true or as you would analyze it and make sense or not. I think there is a lot of that counts as a community now. Sinfulness. Anybody else? All right, let's go on with this analysis. Now, next point would be the importance, therefore, of the parish attempting to respond to this hunger for community. Parish has to try to do this. Now, as soon as you start saying that, you end up with all kind of problems. You begin to realize how limited parishes are that way. Certain problems are built in. That is, size. That's another part of our Catholic problem. Our parishes are generally larger than most Protestant parishes are. And the size militates against forming community. You know, we get into some of these vast churches with large numbers present. Well, you know, the pastor can't know everybody. You walk in and you look around and probably 90% of the people you don't know. You can't really, be concerned about their mother dying because you hardly know them. Well, you couldn't think of taking dinner over to their house or something for 98% of the people probably in the large parishes. You couldn't think of interacting in that very personal and warm kind of way. Simply too many people. So there's another way, I suppose, in which there's built-in problems, and that is the fact of the changing neighborhoods that I described before. The old line parishes, in the city of Toledo, we had a lot of those where people grew up there, on LaGrange Street. They grew up there. They stayed there throughout. The parish is where they went for the dances, for the socializing. Their kids played basketball there. Kids went to school there. One's whole life revolved around St. Adalbert's Parish there. Well, that was one's life. Well, now, of course, that breaks down. Well, because of the changing neighborhoods, because of mobility and so on, there's less opportunity for parishes to build on the substructures, the given communities that are there in the area. Now, in addition to those kind of problems, there's also what I would call the unnecessary problems. Those ones are inevitable, built in. There's also unnecessary kinds of problems. That is, where the atmosphere in the parish is not particularly welcoming, where there's a cold, repressive sense surrounding the liturgies or surrounding the educational opportunities that go on there. Oh, it could well be that the pastor is so important in this, and that maybe the pastor simply doesn't portray an openness, doesn't portray any sort of warmth, no real seeming interest in what is going on, and therefore the pastor sort of sets the tone for the whole parish. Then you get a parish where the greeting of peace, is like pulling teeth, they're visiting priests, and they're all going to have the greeting of peace now, and they look like fire daggers at you. We're not doing that here. Newfangled stuff. We're not into that. No, I mean, you get a feeling about it. I mean, it just isn't done. Let's all hold hands during the Our Father. What? What'd he say? Sort of this mood. Feel, I mean, that pervades, you know, I mean, cold, I guess you would say. So it seems like, poor singing. Whatever else it is that doesn't, that unnecessary things that cause our problems. So, what are we going to do then? Well, it seems as though we have to try to figure out a way to make the parishes better at fostering community. Now, the obvious thing is to reverse those trends. I mean, even I think in big parishes, and I've seen it happen, where you can create a certain good sense in there, where you can have really good singing and people get into it. And even though people don't know one another, it can happen. During the summers when I was teaching out at San Francisco, we used to very often go over to the Oakland Cathedral for Mass. Now that's a cathedral church, great big old church. Most of the people, we walk in there, we don't know anybody except the group of 5 people we went with, and yet they create a sense of community. It's marvelous. I mean, it's one of the best liturgies I've seen anywhere in the United States. They know how to do it. They got a big budget. They put a lot of money into making it work. They got a lot of people involved. The ushers are terrific. Make you feel welcome right away. The pastor, when he gets up and at the greeting at the beginning, makes sure everyone is there. You have a feeling like young and old, black and white are all welcome. You see mixtures of all kinds of people in there. And you at the end, they always have a sort of a rollicking hymn when we're walking out at the end, some sort of secularized song. I don't know, none of them come to me right now what they are, but they're kind of things that you would be clapping hands to or sort of bouncing out of church. But anyway, here you got a situation, a cathedral church, old church, large grouping. People don't know one another, and yet you got a feeling of community when you walk out of there. So it tells me that with real effort, you can do a certain amount that way. All the elements are important. The greeting by the ushers. That's why everybody in a parish has a role to play. The music, the way the readings are done. Even the greeting of peace is so important. The greeting of peace in that church is an event. I mean, geez, it's a terrific thing. I mean, they got a full orchestra about playing there while the greeting of peace is going on. And it's just magnificent. Everyone's roaming around the church and saying hello and so on. It's a fine thing. I remember one of the things they said at the beginning of Mass one time, you had to turn the person next to you and tell them something about something distinctive you were wearing. And there was this black lady next to me who had this unbelievable hat on. And I got a long monologue on the significance of this hat. It was marvelous. But they do things like that, I guess, to break the ice, to get people talking or to get people feeling somewhat part of this community. So what it seems to me is that even in the large groupings, you can do this. And I'm sure that the tone of the homily and the actions and attitudes of the celebrant are extremely important in this. I think one of the neat things that Bishop Huffman does in this diocese is just go around and celebrate liturgy. Now, Bishop Huffman, if people know him over a period of time, has improved tremendously as a celebrant. If people have watched him over the years. I mean, and that seems to me to be one of the great things he does. In other words, he goes around and other priests can see that he sort of lets his personality come out in the liturgy. And the natural warmth of the man sort of invites and pulls in. Anybody who's been, and he keeps improving at it. That's my point. And what it tells the priests in the diocese, it seems to me, is, hey, we could improve too. just like the boss is doing. Well, why not? Why couldn't we get better at it also? And why couldn't we be a little less stiff about it? A little freer flowing as he's learning to become. A little more spontaneous. So that the style of things, now that maybe, everyone's got a role to play in this. One of the, the ushers, the readers, all that, greeting a piece, everyone's into that. And also maybe the word to the pastors, when the pastor does something good like that, to comment on that. It's all that reinforcing behavior, The behavior is taught us how you do that. You reinforce the good behavior that you like. And then that, someone says, oh, geez, the congregation likes that. I'll try that again. The Lord be with you. Wow. Terrific. Okay, so what we're trying to do here is to improve the large group celebration. But the other thing that parishes ought to try to do as well is to break down the large group, because the face-to-face stuff goes on elsewhere. Now, it seems to me the Renew program in the diocese did that very well. I know people who are in the Renew groups, they made new friends, they socialized together, they did other things, and more of this face-to-face, intimate kind of thing seemed to go on. I always use the example of when I was at another parish. I always felt proud of our musicians. They used to practice a couple times a week. They played at a number of masses. They had brunch together after the Sunday Mass. I happen to know that some of those people prayed together. We produced some nice marriages out of that group. It seemed to me an example of a sub-grouping, of breaking down a larger parish into a group that felt comfortable with one another, made their contributions, and I think stayed open to the well-being of the larger parish. That always was a model to me of saying maybe we could do more of that. I know parishes, for example, that have retreats just for their lectors, for example, to try to build a spirit of comradeship there, trying always to break down the barriers. So one of the things you do, in other words, is to form the sub-groupings. I think Bishop Ottenwell in our diocese, when he was down in Delphos, Ohio, did a whole lot of this geographically. That is, his large parish was broken down into neighborhoods, and they had home masses there, and the people who naturally knew one another would gather around that kind of Eucharist. So what I'm saying, I guess, is that it is possible, in a couple different ways at least, to have the parish overcome its problems and to begin to satisfy the hunger for community. Well, so again, I think back to my sister needing that kind of thing, moving into New York and Long Island, and then as a result, finding bits and pieces of that in her parish and fulfilling a need that was very great. So I think we need to work at that kind of thing and to foster it. I think I'm going to suggest we take a